In today's video, we'll cover the story of Donald Cerrone, who got into one of the scariest scenarios cave divers can get into, kicking up silt and struggling to find a way out. Are you enjoying our cave diving videos and not subscribed yet? Please consider subscribing to our channel. On Friday, August 10, 2018, Donald Cerrone decided to go for a diving adventure in Cozumel, Mexico, where he eventually faced one of his greatest fears. Donald Cerrone, aka Cowboy, was born on March 29, 1983, in Denver, Colorado. He is a retired mixed martial artist, an actor, and a former professional kickboxer. He competed in the Ultimate Fighting Championship in both the lightweight and welterweight divisions. Donald is married to Lindsay, and at the time of his cave dive in August 2018, they had a 6-week-old baby boy. During high school, Donald started professional bull riding, and he also learned scuba diving. He began training in kickboxing at age 20, and he later proceeded to have a MMA career, where he got the nickname Cowboy because of his love of wearing cowboy hats. Donald is widely known for his daring stunts and styles, and his love for extreme sports. He decided to go for a diving adventure in Cozumel, Mexico. Donald is an experienced cave diver who has been in the sport since his high school days when he was certified as a cave diver. On this adventure, Donald and his friend were in Cozumel to explore the area. They spent some days exploring the coral reefs and some shipwrecks. However, Donald and his friend decided to take the adventure a step further and explore a cave system known as Cenote El Aerolito. This cave has access to the sea. It's an ordinary-looking body of water in Mexico that also happens to be home to a non-threatening crocodile. However, beneath the crocodiles is a vast underwater cave system that stretches for miles. For professional cave divers, it's a very unique and compelling dive site. Aerolito Cenote is one of the 18 cenotes on the island of Cozumel. Many of these are difficult to access, but Aerolito has a drive-up parking garage. According to Donald, his friend was one who taught him so much about cave diving. When he was about to leave for the dive, his wife, Lindsay, discouraged him because she believed they might get into trouble since he was diving with an older man whose skills were deteriorating. Instead of heeding his wife's advice, he reassured her that all would be well with them and that she should not be afraid. As he was about to leave for the adventure, Donald kissed his wife and his new baby goodbye. She kept repeating to him that she doesn't want him to go on the dive. But Donald replied, "What are you worried about?" He furthermore said, "This is what I do. I come home every time. I'm coming home." Donald decided to order another air cylinder just to make sure everything was okay with them in the cave. The plan was to use the rule of thirds for gas management. So if they go in with 3,000 psi, they'll use 1,000 psi for entering and leaving the cave, and 1,000 psi for exploring. The remaining 1,000 psi will be for emergency use in case of necessity. They entered the cave with their gear through the small surface entrance. They traveled with the aid of the guidelines that had been placed there by other professional divers to help other divers navigate their way within this cave. It's usually the custom of expert divers to map out caves with these lines because cave systems are usually wide and one could easily get lost. Apart from the guidelines, cookies are also used to mark some points within the cave to further provide specific directions within the cave. They needed to switch from one line to another at some point. His friend went first, grabbing the line and draping it around his neck, allowing him to make the switch with 2 hands. As he went to tie off, his buoyancy device, which is a small device that fills with air to increase or decrease buoyancy, became loose and clung to the cave roof. He then kicked up his feet and flipped around, and his line fastened itself around him. As Donald swam toward him to assist him in untangling the line, his friend began to panic. He started kicking viciously and twisting around, causing him to repeatedly hit the cave wall, simply resulting in the kicking up of silt within the cave. As a result of the kicked up silt, the visibility within the cave was reduced to the extent that they couldn't see themselves. there was a massive cloud that was forming underwater called a silt-out. Silt-out occurs when the diver's visibility is reduced to non-functional levels due to the disruption of fine particulate deposition on the bottom or nearby flat surfaces. Scattering the particles creates a sort of mist, making it very difficult to see where you're going. Such impairment is undoubtedly a huge issue when you're underwater, and even more so when you're trying to find your way out of a cave before you run out of air. When his friend realized he was in trouble, he became afraid, and fear is the worst thing anyone can ever have in this kind of situation. Fear alone can kill you, even though you have the opportunity to live. So Donald watched, within arm's reach of the main line, as his friend kicked around violently and decided to take the risk of rescuing him out of his misery. To make the situation worse, Donald, who was on a journey to help his old friend, also got into trouble as a result of the greatly reduced visibility. He was not able to see himself, not even with his own hands. Was it that Donald did not know the rules of diving, which according to him stated that self-preservation is much more important while diving? This means that when a diver is posing a threat to others as they want to help, it's best to save oneself to avoid the occurrence of two divers' deaths. Why did he break the rule? As he looked at his friend, he also looked at the clear exit way that he could go through to save himself. But he couldn't just leave his friend in the silt-out water. Then he chose to abandon his exit and help his friend. For whatever reason Donald had decided to break this rule, he didn't escape the consequences that came with it because he found himself in trouble, just as his wife had earlier warned him. Donald's effort to get through to his friend proved abortive because as he entered the silted-out region, he lost sense of his surroundings. He wasn't sure of the condition the man might be in at the moment, and he couldn't see his flashlight because it had gone off during the violent kicking. Donald also hoped that his friend hadn't dropped his regulator in this unfortunate situation. What will be the hope of these two diving buddies in such hazardous conditions as these? While Donald became lonely amid the silt after he completely lost track of his old friend. He lost everything to the silt due to lack of visibility. He lost his way, his present location. He couldn't find a way up or a way down. He was in total dismay. He also became very afraid. He was now panicking and breathing harder than ever. In his struggle to find his way out, he banged his head on the ceiling. It was then he realized he needed to calm himself down so that fear would not be the end of him. After pushing away fear, a viable solution came to him. He was able to see reflections of light from his two watches, but he had no idea of his precise location at the moment. However, he had little idea of where he came from, even though he didn't know where he was going. So this began to help him navigate his way through the non-linear structure of the cave. Donald continued a blind journey, and he only depended on sensations to know how far he was going. Whenever he noticed he was swimming against or into the current, he tried to find his way back to what he considered the right route. Not quite long enough, he was able to lay hold of the main line. He was still navigating and hitting his head on the walls of the cave. He checked his compass because when they first entered the cave, he calculated the route of the exit from the first jump to be 126 degrees. This is a bit of a reach, since you might be facing the right direction toward the exit in the cave's winding tunnel. But if you are not in the right section, that route may just lead to the wall of some other tunnel. Donald attempted to swim in that direction, but ran into a wall. He tried to go lower, but he ran into another wall, which sent him back in full panic mode. He kicked and thrashed viciously in his panic, but luckily for him, he exited that section and came across the main line. Donald grabbed it, and although he was in clear water, that section was the wrong place for him to exit. He needed to pass through the silted-up section to get out of the cave, which was nearly 3,000 feet away. He had no choice but to enter the silt and feel his way around until he came across a hole. He entered through the hole despite not knowing which way it led. He came across another hole that appeared familiar and decided to swim into it. However, he noticed that he was swimming against the current, and when they entered the cave, they were also swimming against the current. This indicates that he was swimming in the wrong direction. He panicked and returned to the main line, which was in the opposite direction of the silt. All he could think about as he sat there hyperventilating was the words he told his wife and baby, "I'm coming home." He was still breathing hard and his air cylinder was running low. Different thoughts started flooding his mind, and he thought he might take his last breath within the cave. In his panic, he remembered that he had just about 1 hour of air left in his cylinder, and he was far deep in the water. At that moment, it was clear to him that he might later drown. In search of an exit from the ceiling of the cave, he tried to rig his buoyancy control gadget to lift him. He grabbed his buoyancy device and started breathing into it to fill it up completely. With it full, he shot up to the ceiling of the cave and rested upside down, still thinking of his family. Now Donald thought if he ran out of air, he would breathe from his buoyancy device till he drowned, and drowning was one of his greatest fears. However, as a fighter, it was wrong for him to quit at this point. He was rekindled in hope, and he was determined to find a way out. He began crawling upside down along the cave ceiling. When he remembered that there was a big crack that went through the top of the cave, he decided to look for that crack. When he found it, he followed it until he saw a light through a twisted hole. But he couldn't go through the hole because his tank got stuck. So he still panicked and continued through the crack until at last he found his way out. This is a victory for a determined soul like Donald, who despite being in a dreadful and difficult situation, refused to give up. And it was as if the thoughts of his wife and baby kept him inspired till he found his way out. Surprisingly, his friend had gotten out too. How did this happen? It turned out that after being stuck in the silted-out section, his friend had managed to grab hold of the percent line and follow it out of the cave. Donald told his friend that he had had his last dive with him. Donald then texted his wife, "Had a bit of a scary moment today, but I'm coming home." Donald said he continually had a series of nightmares of being lost in the cave because that experience was one of the toughest he ever had. He was happy to be alive at the end of the dangerous experience that he described in his post as a catastrophic worst-case scenario. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.